My name is Janelle Codiani. I'm the Executive Director at ātac, Downtown Arts and Music, formerly known as Amazing Things Arts Center. We are in Framingham in the old historic firehouse, but right now we are all over the place because we are streaming virtually from wherever we are, as is the vibe of this prolonged period of time. We are a multi-venue, a multidisciplinary performing and visual arts center. You can check us out at ātac160.org, and I highly recommend you do. We have a lot of cool shows coming up: music, poetry, spoken word. Process is a series we run a couple times a month on the second and third Thursdays of the month, where we invite artists of all kinds to talk about their personal process and an aspect of their process that's really interesting to them. And all of those videos exist on our Facebook page, and they will soon exist on our website as well. And I highly recommend you take a moment to check them out. They are a true delight, and it's really interesting to hear what different people think about the way that they create and insights they have for those of us who either just appreciate art or make art ourselves. Those of you who are joining us from Facebook, welcome. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, and the folks who are in the Zoom, you'll be able to just unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can put it in the chat and I will speak the questions to our guest tonight. If you're in Facebook, I will be paying attention to the chat there. So if anybody sees me with my head down looking at my phone, not bored, just making sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate. And so just put your questions right in the comments and I can bring them to Jaina. And with that, I want to welcome Jaina Cipriano. We have crossed paths in a number of different ways, I think through social media and other things. And so I have been personally really appreciating her work and asked her to be a part of this series. And so I'm going to pass it over to Jaina, and then we're going to get started.
Thank you so much, Janelle. It's so great to be here and to have an opportunity to talk about something that is so important and close and vulnerable to me. So I'll start my little slideshow for you guys of self-portraits. So we're here tonight to talk about the idea of using self-portraiture as self-care, which is something I've been doing for a long time, for probably like a decade now, which is crazy to me. But yeah, so I grew up with a very unsure sense of self, which came mostly from an upbringing in kind of an evangelical cult that really stripped me of my identity and reflected back to me parts of other people that were not parts of myself. And so I spent years lost in an echo chamber, very isolated and cut off from the outside world. And for a long time, I felt like I was the unreliable narrator of my own life. And as a child, I would make sure that I checked all reflective surfaces to be sure that I was still there. It was a compulsion of mine, but the mirror was never enough for me. There was always a fear that at any second, I could just disappear. And I know now through many years of therapy that my object permanence was very underdeveloped, and I was under the impression that as soon as you turn away from something, it just ceases to exist. But the camera was a way to always be looking. And so in a way, you could even be looking once you turned away by freezing moments, and that prospect was very calming to me. And my mother took this picture of little Jaina in her pink rain jacket with little cat ears on it, pouring out a bucket of water on like a rainy Sunday, and the flash had captured the water in motion so perfectly that it looked like ice suspended in midair. And little Jaina carried that photo with her everywhere. It fascinated her because life felt like such a whirlwind and everything moved way too fast for me. And the idea that I could stop something and study it for as long as I wanted to made me feel really safe. And so once I picked up a camera, it was through the lens that I was really able to find my place in the world. And since then, I've done a lot of different types of photography. I've done portraiture, and I've done documentary photography and weddings, and any type of photography, I've probably done it. But every time I hold the camera up to my eyes, I feel like I'm learning something new. And I think that's why I love being a photographer, because the camera gives you this unique ability to belong in a place that you wouldn't without it. Sometimes it makes you invisible almost to everyone around you, and you can stop and study and inspect. Like, you can use it like a microscope if you want to. And so I started self-portraiture when I was a teenager as a way to really defy the mirror. I wanted to study myself and freeze myself and understand what I wanted and where I wanted to be. And I needed to know who I was. So since then I've taken pictures of myself at my lowest, sobbing and frozen and fearful, and at my highest, like running on rooftops or after big accomplishments. And it was always a way to check in on myself and see how I was really feeling. And I often feel like just a big jumble of emotions that was given a body by mistake, and I can get blinded by the intensity of these emotions if I don't channel them right. So especially when I was younger and I didn't understand why I felt the way that I did. So all these photos that I took of myself became kind of a visual record of my emotions. And tracking them like this was a concrete way for me to understand the passage of time and to internalize that we really do get through our worst days. I found that creative self-portraiture is a way I can be impulsive without being destructive, where I can actually create something and be creative instead. I can cover myself in paint or roll around in the dirt. I can hide in big holes, climb hills, and scratch myself up trying to climb trees, but there is a purpose and there's an end game to it. I can create a safe container for myself. So whether I'm working with myself or working with models, I'm really big on the idea of performance instead of posing. I think that poses are often really static. They can get really stiff and unresponsive. And I love images that are full of action and drama. And I love the surprises that come when your scene takes on like a complete mind of its own. I always like to leave space to dream in my sessions because you never know what's going to come up. Performance to me means like coming up with the reason for the scene. Why are we here? What are we feeling? What do we want? Sometimes it's really concrete. In my tomato pictures, which I don't think have come up yet, but I started as my grandmother, really angry that her kitchen was a mess. But as I went deeper into those emotions, I found other hidden thoughts. And by the end of those sessions, I felt I had traveled through like generations of emotional trauma for the women on my mother's side of the family. But other times when I'm working, it's way more ethereal than that. In my black and white shaving cream photos, my only thought was anxiety. I had been so anxious for days and nothing was helping. And I stood in the middle of a field and I had 2 bottles of shaving cream in my hands. And I thought the texture of shaving cream is really calming. And before I knew it, I had covered my entire body in it. And it was very calming. And I did feel better at the end. I know now, after many years of therapy, that most of my anxiety comes from trying to keep myself together and trying to control everything and keep things contained. And I think if I could let go in my day-to-day life, I would be much less anxious, but that feels like a very nebulous concept. But in these performative moments in this space of self-portraiture, it feels very clear to me. I can really let go of so much that's plaguing me and weighing me down and holding me back and just be present. I can accept terrible emotions for what they are, like just emotions. And when I learn how to translate that to my everyday life, I will be sure to let you guys know. I think that there's something really special about performing for yourself. You're able to try on all these different hats and all these different faces and see what suits you. Sometimes it's the truth, sometimes it's a fiction, sometimes it's both. It's really weird that way. And I think that's because you're both performing and watching. You get to play 2 parts in a 1-person performance. And that really opens the space up for it to become cathartic. Because of the safety of the container that I make, I allow myself to feel things that I can't really feel in my daily life. And unlike modeling, there's no communion between the photographer and the model. And because I'm doing both, there's no space for judgment. It turns into more than art making. It becomes an exercise and it becomes play. And I've begun to think of it as another way to journal, but instead of sitting in front of a notebook, you're standing up and you're like existing live action in the world. But I do use this process when I'm working with models as well. Most of my other work, if you've seen it, is designing and building elaborate setups and staging models inside them, and having these shared cathartic and emotional experiences with them. So working with others is different, but it's not less intense. And it's healing in a different way, a communion between myself and strangers. And I think that shared experiences can facilitate healing. And that, I feel, is the biggest personal loss from this really strange year that we've all endured. Because I think, as we all know, in March 2020, social isolation became the new normal, and I lost all of my outlets for my lifelong box of intense emotions. And so before this, I was boxing, and I was making collaborative art. I was shopping. Anything that I used to use to sublimate intense emotions was gone, and I was reeling. My childhood was defined by really intense isolation, and the early days of the pandemic felt really heavy with that memory for me. And it felt like all the fun was gone. So I took a chunk of an unemployment check and I purchased a lot of stage makeup online, like a lot, like different body paints and lipsticks and fake dirt and fake blood and the black clay that you use to black out your teeth. And I just started painting myself. And as I was doing that, I felt something light up inside me, and I realized I was having fun. I thought a lot about this process and why it was so important for me. And I think that sometimes we all just need a break from ourselves, especially in this like intense pandemic world where we get really pressed up against ourselves, and there's no escape and there's no break from our thoughts and our fears, especially like at the beginning of the lockdown when I did most of these photos. And you guys remember like all of the pressure there was at the start of the pandemic to like do something really productive? It felt so counterintuitive to me. Like, of course, yes, free time is it's great to try something new, but like the more it was pushed on me, the less possible it felt for me to do it. So when I started this project, and I took my camera and a pair of satin pajamas and some red body paint, and I hopped in my truck, I didn't really set out to make art. I just kind of set out to play. I wanted to explore this new way the world was in a way that felt productive and not frightening. So some days I drove around for hours, just listening to music or podcasts before I found a spot that spoke to me. And that was part of the process for me. That was almost meditative, turning off my mind and just looking for a place that felt right or visually exciting to me. But everything felt so bland during the height of the lockdown, so I wanted to be engulfed in as much drama and excitement as I could. And since there was nowhere to go and experience anything new anymore, I wanted to create something new for myself. I allowed myself to go really deep into my anger and my depression and my sorrow and my terror, because I knew that when the time was up, I could resurface easily. I believe it's really hard to make honest work if you lie to yourself. And in this time, I really wanted to lie to myself. I really wanted to pretend everything was okay, but I couldn't. And I needed to find a way that I could explore that in a safe way. I have some behind the scenes clips to show too that are fun, and I think show the process. It's tough to talk about this stuff, so I think visuals for visual art are really helpful. But yeah, doing all of this work, I never felt alone. While I was making these photos, I felt like I was communicating with a dozen different parts of myself, and I felt at home in my body, and I felt safe in my heart, and the world didn't feel quite as vast and scary. But I think we all have stories to tell. Like, you have stories and experiences and emotions that are uniquely yours. And if you feel the urge to tell them, you should honor that, because you never know who's going to benefit from hearing your story. You might make someone feel much less alone, like I have experienced in my sessions with other people back when we could be around other people. So find a safe way to explore your dark inner caverns and see what you can make for it. I always encourage people to play, and to play with light or color or food, or with mess, or do something your inner child has been itching to do. When I started posting this work online, I got a lot of people asking me, like, how do you have this much energy and time to, like, in the middle of a pandemic, to create something so big like this? And I was like, it's just because I'm playing. And I think that we can all do that, you know, like, go do something, go make a mountain out of Play-Doh, or dye your bathwater purple, or bury yourself in sand at the beach. Sometimes it's hard to know where to start when you want to create. So just start where it's fun. Start where you feel like the magic is hiding, or the place where you find yourself smiling. Do something that you just find irresistible. And just because we make art about something serious, it doesn't mean our process needs to be rigid, you know? Experimentation, I think, is the most fun way to grow. And getting a beautiful photo is a wonderful thing, but I think that the healing is really in the process. I have so many shoots that didn't turn out the way I wanted, or turned out different than I expected, but it doesn't always matter, because I believe that art is just as much about the transformation it can jumpstart in us, as it is about the material that we physically create and put out into the world. And self-portraiture, I think, is so wonderful because it offers us the unique experience and opportunity to truly embody our art. It's a way to get to know ourselves as human beings living in this world, but it's also a way to understand what it is that we really want to create, and why we're creating it. So that's why it's one of my favorite things to do. Yeah, and that's a bit about my process. Thank you all so much for listening and hearing about the strange thing that I do.
I love these behind the scenes videos. They're great. I want to remind everybody who's in the Zoom with us that you can ask questions and kind of jump in. I will keep an eye on the chat as well. And those of you watching through Facebook, thanks for being here, and you can put questions in the chat too. I can start us out. I have a couple. One, I have just like a technical question, which is, how are you capturing your photographs? Like you clearly have video on as well, but do you, and I can see in your behind the scenes, like you're kind of like, you're dynamic and you're moving as you're setting up the shot. How are you physically capturing the image that you choose? Do you just have like a timer on and you're just hoping it's capturing the,
Yeah. There's a couple different ways that I work. Often timer, yes. I find there's two options with that. Like you can set your camera to rapidly take like 10 photos, or it can just take one photo. And I find that it's a lot easier to work when you just take like these photos in succession. But I find that my work is often better when I just do like the one photo and then I walk over to the camera and I check it and I walk back. But that also takes forever. So I think it's different depending on like my mood. If I want to do something slow, or if I want to run around like a mad woman. I choose, yeah.
I was curious because your photographs are so, it was interesting hearing you talk about them being action oriented, and you do have a film background as well, or you work in film as well, and so they do feel like scenes either from a film or from theater. You have a lot of like very theatrical like sets, which feel more still in their composition, like they feel more specific and finite, but the scenery is so elaborate and your colors are so saturated that it like brings a lot of drama to it. I will 100% always talk too much and hog all the space. So here we go. We have a question in the chat. Thank you. Hi, Jaina. This is from Julie Gray. Your work is so performative and cinematic in nature, and I do know that you're a filmmaker as well. So I was really wondering if you could talk about the influence of film in your work, and are you inspired by any directors or filmmakers specifically?
Oh yeah, thank you, Julie. I think David Lynch probably inspires everything that I do forever. But when I was a lot younger, I think I was really obsessed with Stanley Kubrick. And I think that those two people together, at least maybe not my content so much, but like visually the way that I see frames probably come a lot from them. And up until I went to school for photo, I had never really studied photographers. I think I studied mostly movies because movies are so accessible and it's such an easy way to consume art that I feel like I learned so much about capturing images through movies. So it's been really fun to actually make movies and transition. Like I feel like I had this, like I stopped in the middle of photos for a while, and now I'm going back to moving images. So it's cool. It's a lot. Yeah. Word.
Let's see. I'm just leaving room for other people because I'm trying to be mindful about not hogging all the questions. I think Matthew has a question.
Yeah. Hi. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So oftentimes a really cool video and like really very visceral stuff clearly going on. And I guess I wanted to just touch on that. Oftentimes when I'm doing self-carry type things, be it with whether I'm like doing something fitness related or I'm doing something kind of just relaxing related, there's a couple like key defining feelings that I have. Among them, like say after fitness, I feel a little bit exhausted, right? And a little bit tired physically, but then I also just feel accomplished, I guess is the first thing that I feel, the first like kind of word that pops into my head. And then if I'm doing something that like is really relaxing and I like dedicate some time to it, because I do like to plan, and I plan some of that time out and I have like an hour of just relaxing, like in the couch or maybe just kind of just chilling in bed, doing some reading. I feel, I guess a little bit at ease and not exhausted, but more, I guess like contented and a little bit tired in that sense. Like I'm ready to like just chill for the rest of the day or for the rest of the weekend or the month, whatever. Hashtag COVID life. And I guess I would just ask, what are some of those defining like words, if you could put it into a word? I know these are kind of like hard feelings, but if you could just put it into like one or two words that when you feel after a session like that, after a self-portraiture session. Is it something like where you feel really relaxed, or is it something where you feel like, oh, I needed to get that out of my system? Like what's some of your stuff?
That's a cool question. I would say, without saying an entire essay on how it feels, I would say that I feel really clear. Like the noise is gone. I imagine it is what meditation is supposed to feel like when you get good at meditation and you don't just feel frustrated like I felt with it. But yeah, feeling really, really clear, and it reminds me a bit of the way that you feel after, or I have felt after an anxiety attack, which also I guess is how you feel after exercising. But the idea of like going through this like to this intense place and getting to this peak, and then kind of coming down from it because you have no more energy to get higher, which is a nice thing because I don't feel that a lot in my day-to-day life. Like I feel like I can always push myself further. So feeling like I got to where I needed to go and now I can actually relax is a really great feeling.
Cool. Thank you.
We have another question in the chat from Victor. Your work feels incredibly detailed as far as use of colors, costumes, and props. I'm curious if you could talk about your approach for choosing those details, as well as how you decide what you're going to leave out.
That's great. I operate mostly on instinct, which I guess isn't really that interesting of an answer, but I always describe it as like when you're playing a video game and the objects that you know you can interact with have like a little bit of a different visual to them, like they look like they were animated a little bit differently, or the light is a little bit different on them. Like when I'm going thrifting and I'm looking through a store, it's like objects just jump out at me, and it's oftentimes, I think they're really simple objects and they're really symbolic objects. I want everything that I put into my photos to have a meaning and a purpose for being there. And I like when you can like infer meaning from things. So I like when I love having symbols and stuff. So when I put something in my images, I want it to also evoke, or at least it does for me, like it evokes memories of oftentimes my childhood. So I try and keep things really multi-layered because I feel like that's when things get really interesting. I like to be able to look at stuff. I'm a really high maintenance art viewer, and I really like to be able to look at stuff for a long time and really feel involved in it. So I try and give that back to the people who look at my work too, because if it's what I expect, then I got to do my best too.
Yes. It's nice to offer what you want to receive. You know, it seems like fair playing ground. Something that struck me when you were talking was about the feeling. I thought about it when you were talking about the feeling of the shaving cream, which I think lots of us, it's a very relatable feeling of like the bounce and press of it. It is very soothing, but also a lot of your photographs have textures in them that are extremely uncomfortable. Like the feathers one, even the sprinkles, the one with the sprinkles, like they're so uniformly placed, but also like I can feel it in my body, and my body doesn't like it, you know, which is interesting in the context of these photographs and these scenes being set up as a form of self-care. And you know, when you were talking about that, I was thinking of like, oh, what like if I were feeling uncomfortable feelings, like what would it do to like just go all in on that and like completely explore that discomfort until it's exhausted is kind of how I was thinking about it. But I'd love it if you'd speak about that a little more. And if it has that effect, if you feel physically uncomfortable when you're when you have feathers and like fake blood on you, or if it just doesn't feel uncomfortable. I don't know.
Oh, totally. Like my face covered in glue and those sprinkles and the feathers kept getting like up my nose and in my mouth, and they were like sharp and they were poking me. And it's interesting you bring that up. I was just talking with someone the other day about how like she was like, yeah, we're New Englanders, and you know, like most of our personality comes from the fact that like we're really good at suffering. And so I was thinking about that. I was like, yeah, a little bit, yeah. But I think a lot of it is like when you're feeling these like really uncomfortable internal feelings, it's often like there's no start point, there's no end point. Like you don't know how bad they're going to get. You don't know, like sometimes you're like, I don't know where these are coming from. Like I don't know when this is going to end. And so it kind of like bringing that, I can feel really claustrophobic inside of myself. So bringing that out of myself and putting that on me. Oftentimes I would feel very stressed about it at the beginning. Like when I started putting sprinkles on my face, I was like, this is a horrible idea. And I hate the way this feels, and I'm going to freak out. And then I just kind of was like, no, like you're in control of the situation. And if you don't like it, you can just wash it off. And so it's like sublimating these emotions and experiences and like giving yourself control over them, I think. And then at the end, you're like, that wasn't as bad as I thought. So like maybe the stuff inside of me is also not as bad as I think it is.
Yeah, that's great. I want to invite anybody from the Facebook chat to ask any questions they might want to ask. If there's anybody else in here that wants to ask questions, please feel free to jump in. Either you can just unmute yourself and jump in, or ask questions right in the chat and I'll read them. I wondered if you, I think for artists, especially media artists, or performing artists, I think the feeling of viewing your body as like a third object of sort of like being your own viewer is common. You know, like I think that people really relate to that. But I think that for folks who don't have that experience, whether it's like, you know, issues with object permanence or having like split households where nobody sees you and you grow up in that kind of way, you know, then for folks who just like don't necessarily relate to that experience, I think self-portraiture can feel very like obviously very vulnerable, but silly in an uncomfortable way. But I think that you're right. I think that interacting with your body like as an object you care for is like a really, I don't know, it's a really, can be a really accessible and loving way to access self-care. Do you have any advice for somebody who like doesn't think about themselves as an artist, but of course we all have like very high quality cameras in our pockets, most of us, that want to like play in that space, and then like, do you have any advice for that little hurdle that people might need to get over?
Yeah, just do it. I mean, I think self-portraiture is so great because you never have to share it with anyone. Like nobody ever has to know that you did it. It can be just for you. And these photos I took this summer were for a long time just for me. I think I worked for like a month and a half and I didn't show them to anyone, which was new for me. And it was a cool experience. And I feel like it really made me go like deeper inside myself. But I always say, like, I feel like sometimes we take art so seriously. And by taking art so seriously, we bar ourselves from creating things, because before we've even like picked up whatever tool we're going to use, we're like, why am I doing this? What is it about? Like, who's going to like it? Where's it going to go? Like, those are great questions to ask yourself. Like, once you've created a body of work, like what is its place in this world? Why did I do this? Like, how am I going to talk about it? But if you haven't created anything yet, like why put up that barrier for yourself? Like, just go. And that's why I was talking about with this body of work. Like it was so playful for me. Like, even if it is really intense and it doesn't, the images that I got at the end, like maybe don't feel that way because I was like working through some really intense emotions, but my process was very playful. And I didn't go out thinking like, oh, today, like this is this one's experience or this one memory, like we're going to get it out of our system. I just was like, like I'm feeling a lot of stuff, and like I really like the color purple today, and like I drove by this place and it looks cool, and I have some music, and like we're just gonna go and we're just gonna do it. And there were 4 or 5 days that aren't in here at all where I went and I did something and it was so bad. It was so nothing made sense. Like the light was horrible, like everything was weird. And I just was like, okay, like just file that away for another day and we'll just come back to it. And I did, and it's fun. People should just play. Art should just be more playful, I think.
I love that advice. I do. It has actually been something of a theme in most of these talks. And all of the artists that we've featured, you know, like yourself, are accomplished and skillful and have produced various bodies of work that are varied and deep. And it's interesting to hear all of these people who are like definitely legit be like, it should be fun, you know, which is just, it's a little counterintuitive, I think, especially as you're learning about art making. You know, we do have this very like, you should know exactly which incredible honor this work is going to before you even begin. And so I really I love hearing that advice over and over again. Well, usually when I turn my voice to go like this, like, well, people put in more questions. Everybody an opportunity if you have any more. But I love your work, of course. And I really appreciate you spending some time to tell us more about your process. And I learned a lot. And I definitely learned new things about how you're approaching it that I will take to viewing your work as well. If anybody else wanted to view your work or ask questions that they forgot to ask while they watch this, or that they might have seeing it later, where can they find you?
I am all over the internet. You can Google me now and it's like the first page is just me. But you can find me at my website at jainaphoto.com or on Instagram at Jaina's Photography. And you can always send me an email or a message or anything. I love to talk to people. I love to connect with people.
Do you have any new projects coming up that you're excited about?
I do, yeah. We are in pre-production right now for my next short film, which is called Trauma Bond, which is like a surreal, bizarro coming of age story about 3 women trying to process some traumatic events. And it is, yeah, it's weird. I'm really excited about it. It came out a bit weirder than I thought it was going to, but I think it's going to be really fun and a bit more lighthearted than my last film. So we're filming in April.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending some of this pandemic time with us and sharing your work and your behind the scenes. And I just really appreciate it. So
thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you everybody, both in the Zoom, in Facebook, watching, anybody who's watching this in the future, because we're all just in the future now where things happen at all times. Thanks for watching this and spending this time with us. If you have any questions, you can always email Jaina at the in the contact information she gave, or you can always email ātac or check us out on our website, and we're happy to hear about what you're up to. All right, I'm getting super good at ending Zoom meetings before everybody keeps waving. So I'm gonna say thank you everyone for being here. Have a great night.